Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Future Hacker. I'm your host, Maria Taiji, and today we're talking to Cara Shortsleeve. Cara is the CEO at the Leadership Consortium, a leadership development platform for high-potential leaders with a specific expertise on accelerating women and people of color. Prior to TLC, Cara spent more than a decade in various leadership roles at Google and YouTube, and her passion is for quickly building value for individuals, teams, and businesses. Hi, Cara. It's so great to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I am great, and I'm so pleased to be here.
Awesome. You know, Cara, in all Future Hackers episodes, it doesn't matter the topics we're discussing, it's unavoidable to get into the workforce qualification matter. Companies that are willing to innovate and prepare for the future are facing this gap in knowledge of their workforce, right? So there's also this generation shift that will give us this dramatic change of what people we will expect from companies they work for, which is super different than what we expect today and what, you know, your parents and grandparents expect in the past. So this is natural, right? How are you preparing the leaders to face this future?
You are so right that there is a big shift, and preparing leaders, that is a lot of what we do. So at the business I run, as you mentioned, we do leadership development, and helping people think about how to show up in the future is a huge part of what we do. So I really think about this in two levels. The first is sort of as the leader thinks about themselves, like as a leader and how they need to evolve. And then the second piece is how we can help prepare that leader to really act on behalf of the company and the business. So for leaders themselves, the way we prepare our leaders is we say, listen, you know, there's so much change, like life expectancy is way up. There's rapid innovation in technology, you know, increased globalization of markets, you name it, like freer flow of human capital. There's all these changes. And obviously you can only lead others as well as you lead yourself. And so as we talk to the leaders, we say, really, there's two things that you need to focus on. The first is a growth mindset. So I'm sure this is super familiar to your listeners, and there's tons of great research out there. But the idea around a growth mindset is really approaching life as a learner and always evolving. So we say to our leaders, listen, like life is going to look really different in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years and 20 years, more so than you'd ever imagine. So you're going to need yourself to be in a growth mindset, evolving your own skills and your own expectations and perceptions. And then the second thing we work with leaders on is on the individual level is evolving their own perspective. So we say, like it used to be you cranked for 25 years and that was sort of your career. And we say, listen, in the future, like you might have 4 different 15-year careers. You might have 5 different 15-year careers. And how do you think about you yourself as a human and preparing yourself to be resilient and to be really forward-looking as you think about a career that's probably not going to span 20 years in 2 companies, it might span 60 years in, 8 companies. So that's how we talk to leaders. But when we talk to leaders about how they can prepare their companies and their teams, the biggest thing we talk about is reframing the approach to human capital. So obviously, I think we all know human capital is a really important part of capital. And with a lot of the companies of the future, I think we believe that human capital is just going to be ever more important. So we talk a lot about what is your approach to human capital? Do you have a learning culture? Do you have a retool culture? How are you retraining your own teams? How are you upskilling your own teams? So we talk a lot about the learning culture within the organization and what the leader can do to ensure the organization not only has a strong learning culture, but is approaching the reskilling and upskilling of employees and human capital as a hugely important key part of their strategy. So that, my friend, is how we are thinking about preparing leaders for what might be coming down the pike.
There's pretty much in line with this lifelong learning method that we've been talking about recently, right? You mentioned this approach to life as a learner. I love that. We need to always be evolving, the growth mindsets. So basically, it will be not only the leaders, but also the companies applying this lifelong learning method, right?
I agree with that. There's wonderful piece of work, and it's old. It's not super new. It's by a gentleman named Fred Kaufman, and it's called Conscious Business. And it's a philosophy on how leaders show up. But one of the big, he's got a few different tenets, and one of the big tenets is to be a learner, not a knower. And I think, to your point on lifelong learning, and I've heard it in your past episodes, I just think it's so important. You're right, for both the individual and the company to think about, hey, how do you not get set in your old ways? How do you not carry forward outdated assumptions? So I just think if there's one thing people can do, it's get themselves into a habit of learning and growth, no matter where they sit in the organization, because it will just be absolutely imperative. Like the faster the world changes, which we've been seeing even this past year in 2020, we've seen things accelerate in a way we never anticipated.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. And, Cara, some people believe that this model of working for the big corporation 9 hours per day, following this hierarchy will change. Not only will change, but it's actually changing already, right? That in the future, people will be more project-based oriented, working with global networks in different projects on the same time for different companies. So that would be very different from what we have today. Do you agree with that vision? Do you see this movement happening?
I do. I might diverge a bit in where I think it ends, but I will say, just as you think about that question of, hey, are we moving from basically the idea of working for one company to working in, a lot of ways to self-manage pods and projects? I'm a student of history, so I always draw from history. So I always just look backwards first and think about so much of employment, the modern industrial era was lifetime employment. Whether that's obviously like Shushin Koyo in Japan, which was literal lifetime employment, or here, I'm in the States right now. So here in the United States, you had General Motors, you had Ford, but there was this whole idea of like a lifelong commitment to your company. And we've obviously seen that change in just the last, 80 or 100 years to where we are today, which has gotten ever shorter in terms of average length of employment with one employer. So I think as you play it forward, my instinct is like, we'll absolutely move away from a 9 hours a day with one company, or many people will. And I really see it for two reasons. I think of like the workforce and then the work itself. I think the workforce, we see it right now. The mindset of younger professionals is just different. And that is irreversible change. You're not within a generation, you're going to have folks decide, no, actually, I'd rather work for one company for 50 years. So at least for a spell of time, we have a generation coming through the workforce that is not inclined towards sort of unquestioning loyalty, whether that's to a company or even a community or a geopolitical point of view. But I think the other piece is the work itself and the portability of jobs and the unbundling that is happening. I think that trend will only continue. So if a piece of a job is better able done in a different part of the country or the world, given the advances in technology, there's no reason it can't happen, and there's every reason that it should, whether that's for price, whether that's for quality. So the trends show us that workers want to have a different relationship with companies, and the work lends itself to be either unbundled or sort of divided up in different ways. But to me, the two big, and this is why I said I diverge a little bit from what the end view might be, there's really two data points for me that counter these trends. And some of that, again, is the work and the workforce. So the work itself, there's always going to be work that is better left bundled. So I think of it predominantly in the services, but think of like I'm going in to get back surgery as an example. Like you do not want your doctors and your nurses to have met for the first time that afternoon. Nor do you want to have a surgery in one place and a nursing team in another place. So there will always be some jobs that lend themselves either to the skill level or the locality that you don't unbundle, and therefore having longer term relationships is better for outcomes. But I think the second piece is the workforce. And for a long time, companies have provided a sense of belonging for people. And that's a really strong thing. And that's a hard thing to replace. And so I do think employers of the future who do an incredibly good job providing community and belonging, that's something that humans need. They've always craved. Like that is something that is hard to unbundle, and that's hard to get if you are a 100% sort of gig economy style worker. So my instinct is it's clear that needs are shifting. It's clear companies need to evolve, but I think it just puts the onus on companies to really, really deliver on a core value prop for their employees, whether that's skill development, social connection, mission orientation. So my hope is you might see some work moving to project-based work, but I think you will also find some amazing companies that are stronger than we could ever imagine because they lead with a focus on mission and human capital and belonging. And that's something that humans crave, and that's never going to change.
Great answer, Cara. Thanks for that. And it makes a lot of sense. So moving the conversation to the more tech side, there's this whole discussion going on about how algorithms are biased and how projects that uses artificial intelligence and machine learning ends up mirroring our unequal society. How do you see the use of technology for inclusion and equality?
I am an optimist, so I lead with that bias. I let you know my bias at the front, which is I am a glass half full. So I have spent my whole career in tech, and so I will tell you, I am still long on tech. I am still a fan of tech in terms of a democratizing tool. So I think, whether it's AI or just tech writ large, I think it democratizes education and access to knowledge. So think about the amazing diversity of thought and diversity of experience that will come to light as we democratize access to education, we democratize access to jobs. When things can be done remotely and technology enables that, you unlock huge opportunities for folks to be gainfully employed. There's an amazing service that tech plays from a diversity standpoint in terms of helping companies attract an employee base that they don't typically attract very well. There's ways to use tech to retain those employees, to eliminate bias in a lot of pay inequity and things like that. So I come from technology, so I come eyes wide open, but I will tell you, I am an optimist and I think it's a force for good. What I will say is, of course, as with all tech, there's huge risks. There's obviously privacy concerns. As you said, there's concerns of bias being reinforced within any machine learning. There's, the risk of tech used for bad. So surveillance, weaponry, all those things. So I've always thought that tech's only as good as the programmer, who writes the code and the data set you pull from. So my point of view is, you still have to trust the humans that are doing this, and we need to help them and put in safeguards and put in, ethics and regulation that help people make smart and fair and equitable decisions. But I think we're far better served to have technology on our side to increase inclusion and diversity and enable opportunity for people all over the globe. Of course, we need really smart people keeping an eye on it for sure.
That's perfect. At the end, it's about, being the surveillance, the safeguards, and having active discussions about that, right? There's some conversations that we need to have so we are actually aware about the challenges and focus on overcoming them, right?
For sure. And I would say, as I said, I worked at Google for over a decade, and I couldn't love the place more. But like I say, as an example, when you think of companies of the future, there was a well-publicized incident where Google had gotten into a government contract using artificial intelligence that I think many thought could be used in a weapons capacity. And the employees basically revolted about it, and Google walked away from that contract. So again, as you're thinking about company of the future and how do companies react to employees, how do employees react to companies, how do our expectations for one another change? Using artificial intelligence and technology is a great example where, if the company is not making the right decisions, I sense you will have an employee base that is portable and could leave and therefore holds great leverage, over the decision-making at the company in a good way. I think it's a good check and balance.
Great. So, Cara, moving on. When talking about having a diverse team, some people think that it's just about, hiring minorities. But there's this whole work that needs to be done regarding the company's culture, the onboarding process, the resources that need to be adapted, and making sure it's actually a safe environment to allow people to actually feel free to contribute. You recently posted an article about how leaders need to make sure you have a safe environment during this whole politic polarization craziness that is going on. And I feel that those same advices apply to making the company more welcoming to any type of minorities, right? So how do you coach people regarding that matter? Any specific advices you could give? Do you see that leaders are finally learning how to really embrace diversity?
This is a huge passion point for me. So inclusive leadership, this is what we do for a living at the Leadership Consortium. This is the gift we are trying to give to leaders all over the globe. Because to your point, there is no diversity without inclusion. So literally, even if people come from a different point of view, they will not share it if they do not think the sharing of that opinion is going to be welcome or valued. So we always say, a lot of people say diversity and inclusion. We always say that's upside down. It should be inclusion and diversity. Inclusion begets diversity. So I'm a huge fan of focusing on the culture of the business or the leader, and their team, and how can you create conditions for all different types of people to thrive. So yes, in a polarized political world, you need to make both sides feel safe sharing opinions. But yes, you are right. That should apply every day, not just during a polarized, political episode or a social episode. So when we talk with our leaders, we always start with safety. So how can you ensure people feel safe sharing a point of view? And that might seem really basic to you, but there's places in the world today where people would not feel safe, physically safe, let alone psychologically safe, sharing what might be very, polarizing or unique points of view. So the first thing we talk about is safety. So how can you set up an environment that enables people to bring opinions to the table? But then the next pieces we always talk about is, safety is great, but what you really need is conditions that celebrate difference. So you need people to be celebrated for bringing diverse points of view to the table. The founder of my business is a woman named Frances Fry, and she and her wife, Ann Morris, are authors of an amazing book called Unleashed. And in that, they talk a lot about what they call the inclusion dial. And it starts with safety, but you've got to get to the place where people are celebrated for bringing difference. Because if you think about it from a business success, what you're looking for at the end of the day is for the business to be successful. And therefore, you need the most innovative ideas. You need to halt problems in their tracks. All those things come from people having the courage to bring a different point of view. So we're huge believers of this at the Leadership Consortium. I'm a huge believer personally, and it's a lot of how I love spending my time, because when you work with a business and help them evolve their culture, it's just an absolute gift to see the amazing plethora of benefits that come when you enable everyone to bring their ideas.
That's great. Thank you so much, Cara. This is the end of our first episode, but stay tuned, everybody. We're going to continue to talk to Cara on a second episode for Future Hacker.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.